to have with us today Minister of Strategic Affairs for the State of Israel, Orit Farkas-Hacohen. Minister Farkas-Hacohen, it's great to have you. I want to ask about these dramatic decisions that are coming down the pipeline. Annexation, application of Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank. We hear about the ICC, sanctions maybe from the European Union and other places. Your ministry's role is basically to be the counterweight to that happening. What do you think is coming, and how do we prepare for that?
It's a very good question, and indeed we are facing a ramp up in the campaign against the legitimacy of the State of Israel. And I just wanted to explain to the audiences that what are the attacks that my ministry in the State of Israel is trying to combat. We are not opposing freedom of speech. We are not opposing even loud and strong criticism against the State of Israel. This is legitimate, and this is something that we support. We oppose attacks on the essence of the merit of the existence of the State of Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people. And this is what we are seeing in the campaign that is ramping up, and that is what we are calling the delegitimization. And you are totally right. The last year has been a very challenging year on that front. If we're talking about several circumstances that has piled up, if we're talking about the pre-ruling issued by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in the United Nations,
the ICC.
The ICC recommending unlawfully, in our opinion, to start an investigation and warrants against Israel due to actions of defending its own borders. Secondly, if we're talking about raising a flag over totally normative commercial activities, raising a flag over the blacklist that was published by the body called the Human Rights Council in the United Nations, signaling over 120 bodies that are just doing business in all the areas of Israel like any other bodies, irrelevant of their political opinions. Thirdly, this is all taking place in an environment of COVID-19, which builds up on a very significant social and political unrest around the world. And this is unfortunately a fertile ground for radicalists and extremists, from the far right, from the far left, that are all combining and collaborating with anti-Semitic voices and people that are calling for the illegitimacy of the State of Israel. So this is indeed a very challenging time, and we are preparing for our addressing this in the sense of separating the two questions of legitimate criticism rather than attacking the legitimacy of the State of Israel to exist as the homeland of the Jewish people after the Holocaust.
A couple weeks ago, shortly after you took office, you sent a letter to Jack, as he's known by his handle on Twitter, the Jack Dorsey, the founder, CEO of Twitter, for allowing Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, to maintain an account on Twitter where he can send out his venomous allegations or lies and hateful comments about Israel to the world. First of all, I'd like to know, did you get an answer? And secondly, what more can be done? I mean, we're all on Twitter nowadays. We see what's going on there. It's a cesspool of hate and anti-Semitism, especially targeted against Israel and the Jewish people. What can be done to stop that?
You're right on point. I mean, that was the purpose of my raising this very strategic issue that, as you all know, occupies many countries, not only Israel. But I want to put the things into context. The tweets by which I approached the CEO of Twitter was a series of tweets by the head of Iran calling a Jewish state, Israel, cancerous tumor, deadly tumor. And when this rhetoric is being used against the Jewish state, we all know it's the old classic rhetoric of anti-Semitism and hatred.
Right.
And with this combined with calls of the destruction of that state, this is also calls for terror and violence. And I think that if we can rise above this, little test case or a demonstration, one of many that which we see in the social media. I think that the issue is the problem that the social media platforms do not really address, and this is the fact that public opinion nowadays is being shaped and being determined in the social media. Facebook, for example, has users that are in numbers bigger in numbers than the whole population of the United States, China, Brazil, all together.
And they can say whatever they want.
Yes, so this is a tremendous vehicle, and it can be used to corrupt the minds and to corrupt the perceptions. And when this is unfortunately a haven for misinformation, for hatred, for violence, I think that it is my duty to address that. And I was very pleased to see that only a few days ago, the CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, gave a public speech, streamed it live, saying that he is going to adjust the enforcement of the users' policy of Facebook in order to stop the usage of these platforms.
And you expect the same thing to happen on Twitter?
Exactly. I expect the same thing to happen on Twitter and by the Twitter's managers, because if you have a user's policy and you do not enforce it, so what's the purpose of that? And right. I can tell you even more. In their reply, they told me, when we're talking about politicians, then we let them say what's on their minds, and the borders of our policy is being more flexible. And I reject that attitude totally, because I think if something is right, it is the opposite.
And there have to be lines.
And I think that political leaders should set an example and should not be a source of hatred and anti-Semitism and called for violence, and especially on social media.
So I want to ask you, COVID-19, right, which has all of the health challenges that it brings, but also from your perspective and what you're dealing with, it's led to this outbreak or fertile ground, as you mentioned before, for anti-Semites and people who hate Jews in Israel to come and rise up using social media, obviously. What can be done to stop that? I mean, if there's the uptick is horrifying.
I think it's a big problem nowadays. When I entered the office, I did a round of, introduction Zoom conversation with different Jewish leaders of different communities around the world, in North America, in South America, in South Africa. And I was really appalled to hear from them one common narrative. And their narrative was that there is a physical fear for their safety because of these developments. And I think that this problem of minorities starting to feel not very safe in their countries should worry every country that wants to keep a safe society, minorities protected, freedom of speech, and a country clean from hatred and violence. And I think that this is a challenge that all of us should, combat together. Personally, the State of Israel is now more than usually committed to assisting those community. If it's talking to diplomatic, if it's a collaboration between the different ministries, if it's talking, I had a meeting with the representative of the European Commission here in Israel, and I think they all understand that the challenges and the unrest that the COVID-19 have brought internationally, socially, and politically should not in any way be directed into damaging the safeties of their population.
So before we wrap up, I just can't leave you or let you leave without one political question. We've seen over the last few days, you're a member of Blue and White, Benny Gantz's new party, or after 3 elections,
of course
relative
I remember.
new party
I'm a member of the Blue and White
coalition.
Party.
What's going on between Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu? It seems almost every day we see something of hostility. What happened at the cabinet meeting the other day where Gantz wanted to talk, Netanyahu didn't let him. What's happening there?
I think the story is not a personal story of what's happening between Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu. You must understand that this is a very complicated unity government that was assembled because of the special need and circumstances of an unprecedented political crisis, health crisis, and economic crisis. But in essence, in merit, these are two parties who are committed to totally different values. And, you know, with this comes a challenge to maintain, you know, and to maintain and to operate. But this is the challenge, and I hope that the two of us, I mean, the two sides of this government are committed and should be committed to what is good to the public of this of Israel, to our children,
and it will last?
And
this
to
government
our people.
will last?
I think that whoever is who will drag Israel to a fourth election is not a real civil servant who will put the public's interest in his highest priority.
Okay. Minister of Strategic Affairs, Orit Farkas-Cohen, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.